Misfits, did you miss me? Welcome back to the Misfits Guide to the Bible, the show where we dig into the weirdest, wildest, and the most head scratching stories from the good book, and also some pretty crazy ideas that some people hold. Today, we're taking a little detour looking into some of those crazy ideas. Still Bible related, but more of a little roadside detour. I'm joined today by Alex Wren, who grew up in Kentucky near both the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum, otherwise known as Ken Ham's multi-million dollar tribute to, you guessed it, biblical literalism. Ever wonder what it's like to grow up next to a life-size Noah's Ark that doesn't actually float? Well, buckle up. Alex is going to let you know. So, Alex, before we dive into the wooden elephant, or I guess boat in the room, why
Mhm.
don't you tell us a little bit about your background? Did you have a religious upbringing? Did you grow up non-religious? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Um, so I grew up in an Irish Catholic family, a very matriarchal Irish Catholic family, and so grew up going to church every Sunday. Also participating in I forget the exact term for it now, but basically we call it CCD. It's basically like the Catholic Church's evolution for children in the church to learn about their faith and to go through the different and prepare for the different stages of Catholicism. And so CCD CCD ends in eighth grade once you're confirmed, but you also go through like your first communion and things throughout those lines. So you're doing the different tenets of Catholicism up until that point. Um, and so grew up Irish Catholic in a very Catholic family, but a very, very accepting Catholic family. Like in terms of either being like a hardline Catholic or a non-hardline Catholic, I definitely fall on the non-hardline. Like my family was very accepting and understanding about queer people and queer existence. Additionally, like my family doesn't really like abortion in terms of the fact that they wish that people didn't have to do it, but they always understood that you need safe and healthy access to abortion care and to like sex ed and stuff like that to make sure that people aren't in the position where they find themselves having to choose those um, different options. So very pro-choice and pro LGBTQ. So growing up, I really liked the religious upbringing that I had. I definitely was able to notice like some of the differences, not only from like me and what I grew up into other religions, but also from people who were going through the same process that I was. And then in like my teenage years, I kind of fell away from religion for a little bit, but I think I've come back to it as an adult in that it helps me find peace. And especially for like an Irish Catholic family, it's so much entrenched into your identity
Mm.
that it's like, well, this is just who I am as a person, let alone like my religious belief. It fills in a lot of my backstory as well in other areas.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So you grew up in Kentucky. So you grew up just down the road from this giant boat that Ken Ham decided to park on dry land, and then the museum that talks about dinosaurs hanging out with Adam and Eve. So, did you ever visit the Creation Museum as a kid? Was that something that you were able to do? Was it something you were interested in?
Yeah, we did visit it probably when I was about 13. My mom had taken my sister and one of our friends there. I think she was just looking for something for us to do. I'm sorry, my cat is screaming. Um, but she was just looking for something for us to do. I think it was over summer break. So, again, just like a fill the time type of thing. And so we did go to the Creation Museum, and it was definitely an interesting experience to say the least. Again, the whole dinosaurs and human beings existing at the same time was a very unique thing to learn about in that museum in terms of like, oh, okay, this doesn't make too much sense. And from what I know about dinosaurs and, the evolution of humans and human history and just the history of our planet. And there were some interesting parts, I think, in the museum itself. I don't know if they still have it, but they had a really cool part about the Ark where it's just like they had like a lot of interactive components to it, and they had built like the side of an ark inside and like showed it what it would look like in water. So that part was pretty interesting. But other than that, like my mom always likes to tell the story when I bring it up that while we were there, she realized that this might not have been the best option of a place to go to because I started like asking her a lot of tough questions that she didn't really know, and she's like, "Why did I choose to bring him here?" And now they're just he's asking me all these questions about like, "Why is this? Why are dinosaurs with humans? That doesn't make any sense." And so she's like, "I regret that part of the trip."
So,
Hmm.
did Ken Ham let you ride any of the dinosaurs to Sunday school, or is that something you have to shell out for?
Oh, you definitely have to show. Well, and you also have to sign a statement of faith to do anything further than just visiting and spending your money on the attractions he has.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's,
Mm.
it's faith, but faith with something attached to it.
Exactly, which as a Catholic is something I'm very familiar
Yeah.
with, but at least with Catholicism, you get some type of benefit out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you less time in purgatory, so it's all
Exactly.
good. What are your thoughts on the Creation Museum? Like, when did you? So it sounds like whenever you walked in, you were kind of like, I don't know, I don't know if I believe this, but is there something more to that, or what exactly was your first impression of it?
I mean, my first impression of it was really just kind of like I said, just like what this doesn't make any sense. Like a lot of stuff, like I would read about it and I'm like, but this, like you would listen to it and you kind of get into what it was saying through like the little videos they have that play and stuff like that. And then like all of a sudden they would shift, and there's that shift in there that's just like, okay, now we're going into uncharted waters in terms of my experience with what even what I was getting told in my church locally. And so it was like a lot of what it was mostly just kind of seen as that, like especially community wise, like most people didn't that I know I don't think have been to the Creation Museum. It was just a thing that you would see the billboard on the side of the interstate if you had to go towards Indiana, because it was that billboard, and then right after it would be the billboard for the zip lines that are like right down the road from the Creation Museum. So you never really thought about it. So yeah, I think when I went in there, it was just a lot of like, okay, like this is a little goofy to me, and it's not what I believe, but if people believe it, that's fine. Like it's interesting at the bare minimum, but nothing too crazy in terms of like having me challenge my own beliefs or anything.
Interesting. Okay. Have
Hmm.
you made a journey back to the Creation Museum or the Ark Encounter since you've been an adult?
No, I've not been to the Creation Museum again, and I will never step foot in the Ark Encounter. Um, I have a lot of the Creation Museum. I think because of when it was created, I was in like middle school, so I didn't really know too much about it until we went.
Mhm.
But the Ark, I was like a conscious adult basically for the entire like conception to where it is today, and at every road point, I've just been like, this thing's a horrible, horrible thing that I wish didn't exist in my home state.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it costs $92 million to build.
Hmm.
I mean, that's insane. It was a lot of private funding and also public bonds too that helped build that
Yeah,
thing. So
yeah,
if somebody gave you that much money, what would you do with it? I mean, I feel like
I
we could
would
find better ways to spend it.
exactly. There's a lot of, especially in Kentucky, there's much better ways to spend millions and millions of dollars to benefit the local economy, especially, and just um, help people out. Yeah, the way that they screwed over Williamstown is truly like an incredible decision on the behalf of the Williamstown government for letting it go through, but then also just like the probably one of the top 10 swindle jobs in the history of the world in terms of being able to steal money from the government. Yeah, the whole city of Williamstown thought that it would be this like economic boom for their city, and they didn't have the infrastructure for it. Plus, Ken Ham didn't really care about what it would do for the city. He just wanted somebody else to pay for it. And so all that money and revenue that should be going to Williamstown, since the attractions in their area is not even getting close to where they're at.
I think just off the top of my head, almost $100 million. That's like 500 $200,000 homes that you could build. I
Yeah.
mean, that is so much money that you could do with. But yeah, I think that's a really good observation that there are plenty of other things that money could have gone to even within that town. Um, personally, I think maybe building a Tower of Babel attraction would be really good, um, which is not even a joke because they're actually doing that.
Yeah, and then why not? Just add another thing in.
Yeah, why not? So they released a statement on what they're going to do with the Tower of Babel. And so they said that it is supposed to tackle the racism issue by helping visitors understand how genetics research and the Bible confirm the origin of all people groups from around the world.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Did you ever see the penguins of Madagascar?
Yeah,
So that meme, it's a pretty old meme now, but I think whenever I was in high school, it was pretty popular. Where it was, "We did it, boys! Racism solved."
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what that statement reminded me of. The Cincinnati Enquirer put out a statement pretty soon after the Ark Encounter was finished, and it says the rest of the $92 million was raised from private donations. So part of it was the public bonds, and then the rest was from private donations. And that's the case even though the Ark Encounter will be run as a for-profit subsidiary of the nonprofit Crosswater Canyon LLC, which is a subsidiary of Answers in Genesis. And those donors include the Green family, which started Hobby Lobby and was also the primary force behind the Museum of the Bible in Washington. I mean, that's just unreal. Because I think, like, we can laugh about this and think it's kind of funny, but there is something I think a little bit more insidious at play with these. I mean, these large Christian ministries come in that are actually for profit, and they run as these subsidiaries of nonprofits in order to find a way through the tax loophole. And essentially what this becomes is this Christian industrial complex. And so even though we like make fun of this, there is something behind this that is a little bit more insidious. And there are real world repercussions, like you pointed out, for the people of Williamstown. And I think even beyond that, like whenever this kind of stuff starts making its way into the schools or into legislation, I mean, real people's lives are affected by this. I mean, you see these
Yeah.
public bonds that they secured, and it's funded by these large Christian donors who have all of this money. I mean, the Green family made sure that their employees, or at least they wanted to make sure that their employees could not get birth control from their insurance that Hobby Lobby was
Mhm.
offering. And so personally, I just don't see how these people are doing the Lord's work. I don't know about you,
Yeah.
but
Well, and it's especially sad, like you said, in terms of the kind of the darkness behind like the bright shining arc that we have down in
yeah.
there is like it again was very much so, especially by Answers in Genesis and Ken Ham billed as this economic like power that's coming into the city and going to beef it up really badly. And Williamstown didn't have the infrastructure for it. And it's incredibly popular. Both the Creation Museum, especially now that the Ark has been built, the Creation Museum is even more popular than what it was before. But that traffic doesn't really go into Williamstown or any of the surrounding areas down there. It goes into the area where I'm from in northern Kentucky and where closer to where the Creation Museum is. Because one, that's where like the airport is, and a lot of hotels and restaurants and things are all in that area. So everything all your creature comforts that you need when you travel are all there. And then it's just a 35-40 minute drive down to the Ark, and then you can come back up and call it a day. So you have that component where all this money from all the visitors that are coming to see it. Because I used to work in the hotel industry, and during the summer, our every hotel in northern Kentucky is basically sold out because it's either people are just coming to visit, or and every other room is being filled up by people who are either going to the Creation Museum or going to the Ark Encounter. And so it is incredibly popular. And like the hotel I worked at, like I said, any time during the summer, every single night it was booked out. And you would see it, it would be huge buses and vans of people from the same church coming down to go. And they're like, oh, we're going to go hit the Creation Museum, then go see the Ark Encounter. I don't know how many times I've printed out the directions to how you get to the Creation Museum and then how you get from there to the Ark Encounter. All the economic benefit is just not even getting close to the Williamstown area. And then additionally, it was supposed to be this big job provider, but every person who tries to get employment through the Ark Encounter has to sign a statement of faith. And so, in order to be employed, you have to either change your religious belief to fit with what they say as your employer, or you have to decline that job. And it's interesting too, especially as like the area as you get further south in northern Kentucky, you get a little bit more into your kind of traditional Bible Belt. But northern Kentucky is a largely Catholic area. We had a lot of German and Irish immigrants, and so it is a very strong Catholic community. And Catholicism and creationism don't necessarily, intermingle well. And so I was reading a report earlier to kind of refresh my mind on some of the controversies about the Ark, because thankfully distance does not make the heart grow fonder. As I moved to Kansas, I do not think about Kinham or the Ark very much anymore, which is very nice. But they're having to like specialty recruit college kids from Christian colleges to try to get enough employees to work there because they have this rule that the local community is just not vibing with.
So does it almost become like, I guess incestuous might be a little too crass, but something like that where it just ends up becoming Christians employing Christians and over and over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. And then like that's the other thing too. Something I was reading earlier, it talked about how if this were to happen for any other faith, like if you know Muslims or Buddhists or Wiccans were to come to a city in Kentucky and ask for 60, however many $1 million and um, public bonds to build something and not have an economic benefit for the city, everybody in Kentucky would be up in arms. But because it falls under the domain of Christianity, it gets a pass in some regard.
Mm, yeah. Okay. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about Kinham. So
Mm-hmm.
Kinham, for those of you who don't know, he was an Australian science teacher. He doesn't have any special kind of science training. He literally just has a bachelor's in applied science and then a teaching certificate. So he's a person who believes in young earth creationism, and he was appalled that he saw his students believing that evolution contradicted the Bible and therefore disproved the Bible. And that, ironically enough, for somebody who went to seminary, I see that ironically enough is brought out by biblical literalism, which is something that Kinham wants to push. And really, it's somebody who is a biblical literalist who has to think that science and history have to align with everything that the Bible says. But Kinham, instead of trying to point this out to his students or instead of shifting or changing his beliefs, just said, I'm going to double down on it. And either you don't believe in evolution or you're stupid and you hate God. So, what are your thoughts about Kinham growing up in this area? What do you think about it?
Well, thankfully for the first part of my life, he wasn't really like especially looking back at it and like especially with the Creation Museum being built and then once the Ark happened, I knew about him at that point. But really, he didn't come into my knowledge at all until he debated Bill Nye, and that was a very like big event. Like I remember we watched it in my high school's in my biology class. We watched the debate because I had a biology teacher who's pretty similar to me. I don't know if he was Catholic, but he was a religious guy. But he also, again, being a biology teacher, understood a lot of the components that make up scientific thought and how we test things and how we go through those processes. And so it was really fun. Me and a couple of the other kids in class were really into like the debate and watching it with our teacher and kind of going through the different points he brought up about like carbon dating and like what is carbon dating, how it works, and all the other stuff. And so that's when he first entered into my psyche as a human being. And then after the debate, I kind of disregarded him because again, I'm not a creationist, and I also like I went to the Creation Museum once, and that was about it until they brought the Ark back in, and we're trying to get that funded and get it built and everything. And that's really where I think Kinham the person showed up more so than Kinham the believer,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing at the beginning how like especially I remember having multiple conversations with my dad about how like the Ark wasn't going to do what it was meant to do. We don't have a lot of success in that area with generating income for the local communities. Like we had a whole NASCAR racetrack that didn't work out, and if you think that NASCAR wouldn't be popular in the South, like where else would it be popular? And it didn't work out, and so it's like, well, this might be popular because of the religious component with the Ark Encounter, but for the community, the benefits probably won't be there, and that's what we've seen year after year, where Williamstown has been shafted in a way of their own making, to be fair, but they let him come in and take as much money as he wanted and ran with it, and now they're mad that he ran off. And so, but it's just like a very like Ken Ham as a human being. I think that's where I like really think about him the most is like just the way that he's kind of wormed his way into my home and how he's kind of wormed his way into creating a lot of issues within the community that I'm from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's funny that you mentioned his debate with Bill Nye because Ken Ham has actually cited that as the reason why the arc was able to be finished because he said they had actually hit a stall. And after his debate with Bill Nye, people started funding it. So, ironically
Yeah.
enough, we might have Bill Nye to thank for the arc.
Well, that's the issue with like debates, and sometimes it's better to just let people talk into their own void and not bring their voice to the mainstream because then you get situations where now there's a giant 500-foot or whatever it is arc in the middle of Kentucky that only benefits one man and his organization.
Yeah, I think that's something that I see that's interesting with people that do YouTube debates and things like that, of why you would probably always rather punch up than punch down. Because if you have a larger audience, all you're doing is moving that audience to this smaller person who might not have ever gotten the attention otherwise. So I do think
Yeah.
that's interesting. What was it like growing up in this community where you have a lot of people that are presenting creationism as scientific fact. Did you encounter that a lot, or was that something that was more on the fringe?
I would say it's more on the fringe. I think growing up, and again, we're at like the area where the Creation Museum and the Ark are, is there's a very like fine line between those areas in terms of both like spiritual belief, but also like community culture as well. So the further north you get in Kentucky, again, you get more Irish and German Catholics, a larger Hispanic population as well, who's predominantly Catholic as well. And so, really growing up, a lot of people that I knew were Catholic. And then there would be like some different subsections of Christianity within there, but nothing too crazy. I never really met anyone who believed in creationist ideas or, most of it was like Baptists or Lutherans or some Methodists and some non denominational Christians as well, but I don't ever remember hearing anybody talking about creationism and how the Earth is only a couple hundred years old. But the area where like the Ark is definitely where that line shifts from predominantly Catholic communities into your more traditional Southern Baptist community, and where you get to like the different communities within that, where you have people who may talk in tongues or speak with snakes, those types of things. And so it's a very like 10 minutes can be a huge difference in terms of the community that you find yourself in.
So you never had any kid try to actually your science teacher or
No,
anything? Yeah.
no, thankfully I did not.
Growing up in this area, having grown up with a Catholic background in an area close to, I guess, maybe evangelical Mecca is a good way
Mhm.
of describing it. How do you view faith and science now?
I think that they are things that if you want to, you can have them work in congruence. But if you want to value one over the other, you're probably going to fall away from the other one. So I think for me, especially, because like even within Catholicism, we have a lot of, it's a very unique part of Christianity. I almost kind of consider itself its own thing in relation to especially a lot of the other Christian denominations. In the fact that we have a lot of like ritualistic beliefs, and when we're taught to that when we take the Eucharist and when we drink the blood of Christ at church, that is the blood of Christ, that is his body. I think there's like a ritualism and almost mysticism within Catholicism that makes other scientific thought a little bit easier to kind of believe, in the fact of like, well, if I can imagine that this little shitty wafer that I'm getting on Sunday is supposed to be Jesus's flesh, then I can, you know, consider opinions on like how old bones are if you carbon date them and stuff like that. So I think it works a little bit more within scientific thought in terms of questioning things.
Hmm.
And so for me, I think, especially coming back to my religious belief when I had not been super religious for a while, I think it also is like can be a grounding force, especially in turbulent times like we find ourselves in now, where it's like, when religious belief is challenged, people get firmer within their belief. And I think that message can be also applied to scientific belief, where when scientific belief is challenged, you can really take those skills and kind of build up like a no, like we can showcase within, scientific practice and scientific research that we can find these things to be true. And so I think that part of my religious belief has helped me in terms of like understanding and accepting people from where they come from when we talk about like science or religious belief and the incongruences that can exist between them. But I also think there's a steadfastness that I find where it's like, you can come and talk to me, but these are my beliefs and I will not be shaken from them. I think too, a lot of times, I tell people this a lot too as well, that no two people in any congregation religiously are going to have the same beliefs. Like you can go checklist for checklist, there will always be incongruencies. And so I think that's a crucial part of understanding in terms of being able to kind of make science and religion coexist as well, in terms of like, we see scientific data all the time where you'll study something and you'll find results, and then someone will replicate that study and they'll find different results, and you have to be like, oh, okay, that's just how it is. Maybe my population that I did mine with is different from your population. And so I think that's another area where, like, if you have that understanding, you can take it into other components of life as well.
I think that's nice. So, do you still practice? Are you a practicing Catholic, or is it more just kind of your own personal belief?
There's certain components that I practice. I don't go to mass anymore, really. I do think that over the past year and a half, I've gotten a little bit more into like the actual practice and doing some of the ritual components of Catholicism as well. My grandmother had passed, and again, she was like the head of the lineage for Catholicism within our family. I think once she passed, I kind of felt the need to kind of step up some of that as well. Like, well, she's not going to mass and praying for me, and maybe I have to do some other things. So like occasionally I'll pray the rosary, I'll pray and I'll think about scripture and things. And then I also will, follow things like Lent and give up something and try not to eat meat on Fridays. Just things that more so that I do in reverence to her and her belief instead of just in reverence to my own belief. Because with my own belief, I don't think I feel that requirement, but I think the more that I kind of step up into what Catholicism means to me, it would have meant a lot more for her as well, of just being able to live as I want to live within my Catholic identity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. If you encounter anybody who is on the fence about going to the Creation Museum or the Ark, what would your final review be?
That's tough because before the Ark, I would say, and probably still now, I would say you can go check out the Creation Museum. Like it's worth it to go once. They have a petting zoo, so there's like a non-religious component that you can also interact with if you're tired of what is being talked about inside of the museum. But it was interesting to say the least. Like, it makes you think about things and makes you at least engage in thought and stuff. So I would say I would recommend checking out the Creation Museum once. If someone, like, if you're leaning on the fence of like, I might want to go, might as well. Like, go make a nice trip of it. It's a good area. So like, you can go to the Creation Museum and then see a lot of really cool architecture, go to downtown Cincinnati and stuff like that. It's not too far away. So you have a lot of other options. But I would not recommend going to the Ark, just because of like, and that's where like I kind of come into a conflict too, because with the Ark, I'm like, do not give money to Kinham, do not support him in any way, shape, or form. But then I'm like, oh, well, you can check out the Creation Museum. That money's going to the same well. But in my head, like, even for myself, I would potentially go back to the Creation Museum again. I would never set foot in the Ark Encounter and see what they're doing, or any other things that who knows what Kinham will do in 20 plus years. There might be 14 different theme parks across the state where they're all related to some random thing.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. It's complicated because I think it is something that people should investigate. I mean, like you need to know why you don't believe something, but at the same time, there might be better ways to be able to get that information without having to give money to them, especially
Yeah.
especially considering what the Ark Encounter has done to the town of Williamstown. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you for joining me today. If you want to, this is where you can plug your socials. You don't have to, no pressure. Just
Mhm.
if you want people to reach out, if you don't, then we can not do
Yeah,
that.
I'm not super active on social media, so I don't really have anything to plug. But if they have questions, feel free to, I guess, send them to you, and you can
Yep.
always ask me.
Yep, that sounds
Um,
good. Before we go, I do want to watch a trailer of something that
mhm.
I figured you would appreciate. And at some point, I'd love to have you back on, and I'd love to be able to just watch the thing in its entirety and be able to react to it. Okay, so what this is like a parody of Night at the Museum, but they did Night at the Creation Museum, and they've
Oh,
also done this with Night at the Ark Encounter. So I just figured that you would appreciate this. So if you want to come back on sometime and watch this together, I think that'd be a lot of fun. So
oh
we'll
yeah.
go ahead and watch this trailer.
Hey, Derek.
Yeah, Derek Daly, new night guard around here.
Hey, good to meet you. I'm Jim.
Naturalistic evolution and biblical creation. I don't even believe in science. The monkey! I remember you. What was your name? Dewey? Deborah? Dixie? Dexter! Dexter!
Yeah, it's just
I have to give him props. That slide he does, incredible,
yeah,
incredible
I know.
forward, great athleticism. But I would very much so like to watch that full thing.
Oh yeah, no, it looks incredible in the worst possible way. I
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just I wish that people that would make low budget movies would lean into that a little bit more, and it looks like they
Mhm.
were trying to take themselves a little too seriously. So,
Yeah. Well, now, and I definitely have to recommend going to the Creation Museum. You find out you can put yourself in that same spot he is when he's being confronted by those different dinosaurs.
well, and so the thing that blows me away, so this channel is kind of like a smaller channel. Oh, well, I say smaller channel. He's got 20,000 subscribers, but most of his videos only get a couple hundred views. But the Night at the Creation Museum, which the thumbnail for that, they literally just took it, like ripped it straight from Night of the Museum and just like superimposed their faces on like Ricky Gervais and Ben Stiller. So it's pretty incredible. But that one got 50,000 views. So apparently people, I don't know if it's like a hate watch situation or what's going on, but
Mhm.
either way, I still think it's great.
Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah, love to have you back on and we can go through that together.
Oh yeah, for sure.
As always, if you enjoyed this episode of the Misfits Guide to the Bible, don't forget to like, subscribe, or if you're feeling so inclined, share this with a friend who still thinks that the Earth is 6,000 years old. See you next time. Peace.